Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Etty, and welcome to Etienne, because you don't get the welcome if you welcome everyone else. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. I'm Dave Hampton. I'm delighted to welcome you to MAC this evening and to welcome MAC this evening. My connection with Embecum goes back 15 years or so, and it's fair to say it had a profound effect on me. Those of you that know me recently will see the effect and can judge for yourself whether it was good or not. But so much so, I returned there every year since to volunteer on the programme, which is called The Journey. You'll hear more, I'm sure, but for those that don't know, Embecum is a rather special centre in a valley on the edge of Dartmoor, and programmes have been run there for 25 years now. In a sense, Embecum is a garden where people are grown and in nature. Over 2,000 people have done the journey now, and those people show up all over the world, living with great care for our earth and walking the talk they tread. Mac is my mentor now, so I'm a bit nervous for more than one reasons, but there are many things more I could say, but I was only given a minute and that's all I need. Perhaps the most important thing I want to say, though, is that Mac is probably, the most important thing is that in Mac, I found a man that I could trust, deeply trust, in a world where I previously found very few men worthy of that trust, and no apologies for gendering that statement. Perhaps as a consequence, as a man myself, teaching me how to deeply trust myself. So no pressure at all, Mac. Over to you. Hope you will have some fun with us tonight.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks very much. Thank you. I feel inclined to say thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here and offering some thoughts to champions for the earth. And I was just considering in the short time before we came online that I was 50. I mean, I was born in 1949, so it's quite a long time ago. And I was 15, standing outside our front door with a scowl on my face, looking right and left along our street, with really quite dark thoughts flitting through my mind. And my mother came up behind me and saw the expression on my face and asked me why I was looking so disheartened and possibly angry and upset. And I said, well, I'm looking up and down our street and I feel I can see my future. And it is incredibly tedious. It's about as boring as I could possibly imagine. I feel like that's the invitation. I just have to do well at school and then do well in whatever further education I go through. And then I have to aim for a job that will pay me well. Then I get a house, then a bigger house, then a bigger house. Eventually I get a pension perhaps, and then I go on cruises. And after that, it's all finished and that's the end of it. I said, I really find the picture that I see in this street and the predictability of all the years lying ahead of me appalling. I can't believe I've been born at such a boring period in human history. And my mum muttered something about, I'm sure it's not quite that bad, dear, or something of that kind. And the moment flowed on. So I have, of course, arrived at a different place. I now have come to believe that I was born at one of the most extraordinarily exciting and challenging and frightening and extraordinary times in human history. And my work is around the design and facilitation of programs which are seeking to encourage people to take up the invitation that I think our Earth and many indigenous people and many other people around the world have been extending for years and years now, to get involved and to act on behalf of the things that they care for and love and find beautiful. The journey that I went on included, and I thought I would mention this since I never became a champion, but I did go to Loughborough College, and there I was a gymnast. And one day the guy who was running the British Olympic gymnastics squad visited, and I, along with others, was invited to sort of do some of the routines, and he invited me to join the squad from whom the team would be picked. But as I said to Etienne when we were just chatting about this call and Dave, I said, I declined the offer because really deep down, all I wanted to be was invited. I just wanted to be able to know I could have done it if I'd wanted, and then I didn't have to do all the hard work that would have been involved in actually getting into that team. And but I think also I probably knew that I didn't have the passion and love and dedication for gymnastics that this would demand of me. And so I probably made a good choice, and I enjoyed being invited. Mm-hmm. I came to realize, I suppose in my 30s, that I had a different calling, or a calling that could have included gymnastics, could have included and has included many sport, particularly in mountains and rivers and outdoor places. But that calling was to fill this life with meaning bigger than what we tend to call a career, bigger than my own personal achievements, but on behalf of all things that I've come to love during my life. And what those things are really very ordinary things. They are, they're ordinary, but they're not necessarily the case for millions of people around our world. So we could say freedom, and the knowledge that it's unlikely that somebody's going to come along, stove in the front door tonight, run through our house, drag myself or any of my family out of that house where they disappear into the night, never to be heard of again. The smell of bluebells, which are right now sprouting in our woods and soon will come into flower, that extraordinary scent that fills many of our most beautiful woodlands. The turning of the seasons, the smell of soil, trees, all things beautiful. Human beings, I have to say, I love nature first, and rather later down the line, human beings were wrapped into the same thing. I found them a bit more complicated to feel quite so open-hearted about, but I'm glad to say I got there in the end. Those tiny moments of intimacy, moments of connection, moments of joyfulness, moments of gentle kindness, all those sort of things, I think, in the end, is what actually makes these lives happy. But another one is what we could call purpose, knowing that our lives are somehow have meaning and some kind of in an enduring way. And I think for me, at least, this has to do with something to do with the only recently born and the unborn, human beings and more than humans, all other forms of life. In other words, those to whom we hand on the torch, those who will receive what we have either created or sort of left behind in some way or other. So earlier today, I'm speaking to an Australian woman, the other side of the world. It was, at that point, it was her nighttime. She stayed up for the call because I'm speaking to a conference of 15 to 18-year-olds in Australia. Many of them, she said, are feeling quite hopeless, quite confused, betrayed, and many other things besides, by my generation and perhaps yours. Later this month, I'm speaking to a group in the States, in the United States, who will all be over 60. And the content of that talk will be exactly the same. It will, in the sense that it will be seeking to make sure that they've received the invitation and that they understand that being 60 or 70 or 80 or 90, if you're still alive, is no reason for calling it quits and sort of throwing in the towel and announcing that it's now up to the young people. And equally, to those teenagers I'll speak to, that the baton is with them as it is with all others. So what if we were to imagine that to be a champion for Earth is some kind of leader? What would that look like? And so for me, and for the work that I do, we say leadership has nothing to do with a title that you hold. It has nothing much to do either with the accomplishments that you might have under your belt. It has to do, and the kind of leadership I'm talking about has to do with whether you care, how much you care, and whether or not you're prepared, your caring is sufficient to bring you to action. We talk about climate change as being perhaps the biggest issue facing our world right now. And many times I've said, no, there's a bigger issue. It's, I think, a much bigger issue. And that is the passivity of millions of good people around the world who do care, who are good-hearted, who love their children, who separate their rubbish and purchase slightly differently in the shops that they go to, who would probably look after you if you got hit by a car in the road and would come to your aid, but who never go anywhere close to understanding that really they are called to a far bigger stage, a stage where their name may never be known, a stage where they may never be celebrated, a stage where they may, whatever they do may pass unnoticed. But if in the millions people stood and demanded the world as we wish it to be and as it could be, things would change on a sixpence. But as it is, even when we get the biggest of gatherings, it is a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the actual reservoir of people who could join. And just for clarity, I'm not speaking about any particular organization or any particular rallying cry. I'm just speaking generally. I really am. So a leader is someone who is brave enough to act on what they know to be true. It's not an academic definition, because I'm sure that some of the worst dictators around this world have acted on what they've known to be true. But you understand the sentiment behind this. It's someone whose actions are in alignment with their values, with their conscience, with what they know in their heart. A leader is someone who is brave enough to act on what they know to be true. Say a leader is any person of integrity who embodies that integrity in small and big actions, minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, year on year, forever. Any person of integrity who embodies that integrity in action all the time. Now, given that most of us are riven with all kinds of frailties of one kind or another, we understand, of course, that we'll screw up and things will go wrong. So another thing that an indigenous person said to me when I was participating in one of their ceremonies, had been without water and food for 4 days, and it's in extreme middle of summer, very hot sun, naked to the waist, running to this tree. And, you know, one day of doing that with no water in those kind of conditions is hard. Day 2, I thought I was dying. Day 3, I knew I was dying. And sometime on day 3, as I ran to the tree, I tripped, sprawled, and went headlong, nose and face grinding on the ground with phlegm and spit and whatever, and gurgling, twitching on the ground. And this guy comes up to me and kneels by me and whispers in my ear, "Mac, how would you define failure? And I said some gurgled form of like, fuck off, probably, something like that. It was extreme sort of, that was about it. And he disregarded my rejoinder, and he said, failure's got nothing to do with not achieving some goal or other. Failure is not getting up when you've been knocked down. Get up. And I clambered to my feet with his assistance, and I ran to the tree. I'm still running to the tree. I will always run to the tree. I do, of course, get knocked down. I find the whole business and process of growing older and in sort of symptoms which I imagined in my childishness that I personally would never sort of have to go through, but I am. I am invited to defeat, if you like. I'm invited to failure. But I know that failure will come only the day that I cease to care, that I cease to remember that it's a privilege to be alive on this earth with energy, with resources, with my voice, with my heart, with everything that I have. And that brings up really old-fashioned words like duty and honor. There's a group I'm working with, and I asked them to write a letter. What is honor for me? How do I honor myself? How do I dishonor myself? How do I honor others? How do I dishonor others? How do I honor the earth? How do I dishonor the earth? And that's a word, as we know, that has all kinds of toxic affiliations, as it were. A little bit like leadership, by the way, which also suffers from the same disease in a way. But I cannot imagine, can we possibly imagine a world with no honor? So I have at this rather late stage in my life, a little son, he's 6. And I've made some efforts to make sure he doesn't do a guest appearance on this talk, but he still may. And if he does, I rather think it'll be a highlight, but nonetheless. And I look into that little child's eyes. I am reminded of honor. I'm reminded of duty. I know that he loves me, and with that, I know he trusts me. And I think his trust, if you could put it into words, would be that I would do everything in my power while I am alive to demonstrate my love by doing what I can to make sure that in his lifetime, there are choices beyond survival. So it's a big thing. It's a big thing. And yet we ask ourselves, many leaders ask themselves, or people who are flirting with the idea of leadership might say things like, well, yes, but what can I do? I'm only one. Or we on this screen, I haven't counted, but we are, let's imagine, 12. Or let's say it was a good evening and we're 40. You know what I mean? The numbers are tiny beyond belief. Yet, one person who says, within the scope of the gifts that I have, those which are developed and those which are waiting to be developed, within the scope of the size of how much I care, how much I love, the degree to which this is important to me, with all the energy I possess, I will do everything in my power to make this life count. By the way, this is not an invitation to martyrdom. Personally, I think the age of martyrs is finished and good riddance, quite honestly. I think the invitation is to enjoy our lives, to love everything that our lives offer. So this is not like a doom and depressive kind of invitation. I actually believe that when we come into alignment with life, in alignment with the invitation that these times are offering us, it fills us with joy. It may also fill us with fear, but it fills us with joy. It fills us with this extraordinary feeling that we have purpose, that we have family, that we belong, and that we know what to do. And everything else just rolls from that place. So it's a joyful, happy place. It's not only that, because unless our ears are plugged and our eyes are closed, then we can hear and feel and sense the suffering around the world. My wife's from Kenya, she's Kikuyu, and her mother depends upon what she can grow. What she grows, she eats. There is nothing else. And last summer, because of the changes in the weather, the rain didn't come when the rain was meant to come. Everything then is disturbed. The whole village is disturbed. The vegetables she did grow were stolen from her garden by others who had nothing. Her water tank had a hole drilled in it as they took the water. She's 80-something years old. The mayhem that will result through our lack of caring is likely to be extraordinary and very frightening. I'm not ready. My indigenous friends would have said, and neither will you ever be. So you might as well just get used to the idea and say, I'm not ready. I'm not fully resourced. I don't know the right people. I don't live on the right side of town. I don't have enough behind me. I'm afflicted by bad parenting that's wounded me throughout my whole life, or whatever it happens to be. And I'm putting my hand up. I'm joining, and with the fullest of hearts and the bravest that I can bring myself, I walk towards my fear, and I do what I know needs to be done and that I'm capable of. So in that sense, I think that we perhaps take action when our love becomes bigger than our fear. And that is something I would love you to think about, and perhaps even to offer to others. We're never ready. Many of us, a few of us might feel ready, but I can only say that when I was invited by my mentors to start speaking on behalf of the earth, I was shocked and terrified. And so I said to them, look, I'm really sorry. You probably don't understand this, but that is probably the one single thing that brings most fear bubbling up inside me. And they said, yes, we understand, that's fine. So I thought I hadn't got my point across. I said, well, no, it's not actually fine. You see, I get panic attacks in that kind of situation. And then thinking to ram the point home, I said, look, just imagine there's an audience of 300-400 or something. There's a little bit of a fanfare as I'm given an introduction by someone like Dave. I step onto the stage and the PowerPoint slide behind me says Macartney and the title of the speech, on behalf of our earth. I stand there for a few seconds and then start weeping. And I don't stop for 40 minutes. I just melt down. I thought this would really impress them. One of them is smiling at me and he says, yes, that's fine. That's fine. Who would ever forget that talk? He said, that would be amazing, he said, especially have it videoed, send it around the world, you know, Mac McCartney on behalf of our earth, and there he is blubbing his heart out for 40 minutes, you know, end of talk. What they're really saying was, we don't care. We know you love these things. We're simply asking you to obey your heart. And so, as I've told many, many times before, I just thought to myself, well, where can I start speaking where it will matter least if I screw up? And I thought music festivals. Everybody's either stoned, drunk, or asleep, you know. So that's why I went to Sunrise Festival. And there were 3 people in the teepee. I think it was a teepee, not a yurt, that I was going to give my talk. I traveled about 3 hours to get there. The attitude that I had when I went in there was, thank goodness there's only 3 people, that's very good. And the other one was, I'm damned if I'm not going to deliver this talk, because I've been in a state of chronic anxiety for months. And if I don't do it now, I never will. So I gave my talk. Of the 3 people that were in the teepee, 1 was asleep, and the other 2 were in the early stages of having sex. So I gave my talk, and as I gave my talk, and by the end of the talk, the one that was asleep remained asleep, and the other 2 reached the latter stages of having sex. So the whole thing sort of came to a magnificent kind of ending. And I remember just thinking, great, like I've done it. Nobody noticed, that's very good. And now I can go home and I can report back, I've done my first talk. Many of the things that are most frightening for us are actually funny in retrospect, as we see ourselves in a truer light. But I would just wanted to make this also say this thing. You see, I talked about my 6-year-old son, but I didn't begin this work after I'd had my 6-year-old son had arrived, because the children are our children. When my friends used to speak about the children, they didn't even mean just human children. They meant the young of all kind. They meant life, really. It meant everything that is beautiful, everything that sustains, everything that allows the process of reciprocity to take place for life, to beget life, and so on. If there is one thing I think we should remember is that I would say there never was a time like this to be alive. And we walk with joy and grief cupped in our hands. Let's say joy in one hand, grief in the other. Grief because we have not shut ourselves off from the pain and the hurt, the thousands, hundreds of thousands of species who will never be seen again because of our actions. The people in our own country, here in the UK, abroad, everywhere, who have too little to eat, to warm their homes, too little of so much. The huge number of people, whether it's in Turkey, in Syria, in Lebanon, all around our world, Afghanistan, but all over, whose screams we only hear through newspaper reports, as it were. And what will happen if the temperature rises 1 degree, half a degree, 1 degree, 2 degrees? So there is the grief. And I don't think we should shut ourselves off from the pain. I think it's quite important that we do have some visceral sense of that. And then there's the joy. Because if we only experience and see the pain, then we will not be able to sustain. We'll drown in that ocean of grief. But the joy is I would say, deep connection to nature, deep connection to life, deep connection to each other, deep connection to ourselves, deep connection to this coming spring that's hurtling towards us now, deep connection to the food that arrives on our plate, to the sound of kids playing, to the visit to a beach and watching the surf pound on the shore, deep connection to everything that is lovely in this life. And if we can really find deep and profound connection with that, whilst not pretending that the grief and the suffering doesn't exist, then that is a very brave thing to do. And if we can walk in that way, allowing vulnerability to be a part of our leadership and not pretending that we have to hide behind a mask, but being a whole person, then I think the authenticity of who we are will speak through all kinds of defensive strategies and will land in hearts. And in landing in hearts will perhaps lead to questions, which may lead to decisions, which may lead to action. And that, I think, is what we need at this time. So amazing. I said I'd speak for half an hour and I just glanced down at my phone and it says 30 minutes. So I'm going to halt there. And I would be very, very happy to engage with any questions or indeed listen to any comments, should they be forthcoming. And if they're not, and it would certainly not be the first time that there weren't, then I do have a question or two for you. But first of all, let's create a space and just see if anybody would like to ask a question or make some kind of comment.